Hey everyone, welcome to this month's LinkedIn Live, sponsored by Advize Health. I am Eric Rubenstein, the Senior Director of Litigation, Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Support. And we're super excited to have everybody here for this month's LinkedIn Live, where we're going to be talking about data. And if you're familiar with the movie Glengarry, Glen Ross, you know that there's a scene in there where they talk about your leads are weak. And the discussion is about having the Glengarry, Glen Ross leads, which are the strong leads. If you've never seen that movie, I do encourage you to watch it. It is a great movie. And we're going to be talking today about leads and lead generation and why in the SIU space, it is oftentimes the case that we go down a path that isn't really the greatest path in the world because we have to identify where those leads are strong. And today I have one of my coworkers, a member of our SIU team, Dan Nicolino. He is currently the acting director of our SIU team. And Dan has been in this space for quite some time. He is a trusted resource here as a member of our SIU team. He's also amazingly good with data and database manipulation and understanding that. So Dan, I'm super excited to have you on a LinkedIn Live with me hosting this. Tell everybody who's watching this a little bit about who you are, and where you came from.
Thanks, Eric. And welcome everyone. So I'll give you a little bit of background, the 101. I spent the last 10 years in healthcare fraud. The first 6 I spent with the New York State Attorney General's Office Medicaid Fraud Control Unit as an auditor. After those 6 years, I wound up going on to United Healthcare as a senior investigator. And then from there, I joined Advize after 2 years, where I was brought on as a manager, and now I'm the acting director. And during that time, I've accumulated a ton of experience as far as data analytics go, and it's one of my passions. So all the tips and tricks that I could give you today, I think it'll be helpful for you to navigate large databases and try and find a good starting point onto where to generate good cases.
Yeah, and it always starts with that. And as people who watch these and follow us at Advize know that on our OIG roundtables that we do every week, we spend a lot of time talking about having strong leads in the SIU space, working good leads, and not going down a rabbit hole or a path that people wind up spending their time working with. It ends up being a lot of nothing. And so I want to jump right in. And we talk a lot about this on the roundtable, and I know you guys on the SIU team speak a lot about this, and it's knowing your data. And everybody kind of defines it a little bit differently, but when you talk about knowing your data, what are we talking about from an end user's perspective? What does that really mean?
So it's definitely step number 1 as far as diving into any type of data analysis. And what I mean by knowing your data is identify the top codes, identify the top providers, know where the money is going within your data, like as far as like I said, top codes, top providers, and then from there, identifying the top billing procedure code combos to know where the providers are percentage-wise within the plan. And I'd like to show you a couple examples of kind of where I start. Share my screen real quick. So the first thing that we're going to do is obviously pull the top procedure codes for this particular plan, one of our clients, identify where the money is going. So obviously office visits are going to be the top code in just about every data that you're going to look at. Identify the top providers, and for this example, obviously I just have the provider IDs. From there, we're going to identify the top billing provider procedure code combo. So now what you're looking at here is you're going to see a unique billing provider, a unique code, and what the total amount paid is. What I'd like to do from here is identify the percentages within those billing provider procedure code combos. So like what I like to do is I'll put percentages. We'll do equals. So we're going to take this and we're going to divide it by. We're going to do a VLOOKUP based off of the procedure code totals for this particular plan. So we're going to look up this procedure code. We're going to tell it what table. Codex number is 3 because we want to tell it to find the amount paid. Sorry, technical difficulties. Do we have a cough button? Shit.
The trials and tribulations of doing this live will always be the issue here. So if I understand you correct, Nick, or Dan, if I understand you correct while you're going through this, is that, you know, at the end of the day, there are a bunch of formulas that are out there in Excel that people can use. There's a whole bunch of resources on online, and we're actually going to talk in a minute about the use of ChatGPT to create a formula or a macro for use. And so a lot of the data that's out there in that billing history will give you information, but then you have to go in and manipulate that information in order to get you from point A to point B. So for those of you that are watching this, you know, we're pulling in this data from our in-house analytic tool that we use. We're coming up with the top payers, the top providers, the top dollars, the top codes. Whenever you are looking at any data, anything that you're looking at, you're always starting with the top, whether it's the top CPT code, whether it's the top HCPCS code, whether it's the top diagnosis code, the top provider, the top anything. You're going to be looking at that data in that manner so that you're not looking at that data in a vacuum, right? Because data is just data until you've done something with it to give you a flavor as to what the probative value of that data is. So just looking at information in a vacuum doesn't really get you where you need to be. So what you need to do, and what Dan is working on doing, is creating a column that will allow him to see in the aggregate what percentage of this work is part of that overall in that spreadsheet. So Dan, are you just about ready to go?
Yeah, no, I apologize for the.
All right. Yep. This is what happens when we're live. So just reshare your screen.
So now you can see I have the percentages by billing provider procedure.
So just reshare your screen again, Dan. There you go.
So now you see, so for like code 00100, it'll break down the percentage for that provider for that particular code against all of the plans 00100 claims. So from here, what I like to do is I'll do a filter where I want to look at, like, all right, which are the providers that have greater than 50% share of any particular code. Some obviously you'll see is 100, but again, sometimes we're not going to want to look at codes, even though it's only, if they make up 100, it's only $500. That's not something that we're really going to focus on. So I also like to do greater than or equal to, we'll say at least $10,000. From here, we can kind of see, like, all right, this particular provider is the highest for 00104, makes up 96% of this particular plan's total claims for that code. From here, this is the easiest old school way to try and identify out any potential outlier in any particular code. So on top of this, you want to know what these codes are. So it's very important to stay on top of new trends, any type of new scheme, particular codes that are coming out. So some of the tools that I like to use, it's bread and butter. Just take a look at some of the Department of Justice press releases. See what's going on out in the world, where there's other issues with different plans and what types of providers are kind of popping up.
And that's a great example, right? So for example, we often talk on our OIG roundtables about the recycling of fraud schemes. What's old is new, and different iterations of the same kind of schemes that are out there. And you're hitting it on the head. The press releases that are put out about providers that have been adjudicated criminally for their malfeasance is a great way to be able to identify what schemes are out there. I put out on LinkedIn pretty frequently an analysis of press releases that are out there. We talk about them on the roundtable. We put them out in our newsletter, and it is a great source because that is, while it's reactive, it's still a form of intelligence gathering, right? To be able to go in, read a press release, identify what the issue is, and then maybe go online and do a little bit of research about what is that CPT or that HCPCS code, because chances are, if that provider is doing it, nobody reinvents the wheel, right? So you're able to pull some of those schemes right from the public sources of information, such as press releases.
Yeah, that's 100% right. From there, I know once you identify a provider now, depending on where you're gathering your data, I'm sure all of us have experienced before where we look at enormous databases with tons of columns, a lot of them with information that may or may not be populated. So you're looking at very long databases that can be difficult to kind of navigate through. But one of the things I kind of want to show you is after you identify a provider and you run into some of those problems, one of the tools that I like to use, which is now a hot topic, not just in healthcare, but all over. 1 second. Is using different types of AI to help you with some of the data manipulation and different types of Excel formulas and macros. So one of the examples I want to give you, I'm going to use ChatGPT to delete columns that have no data outside of the top row. So I think it's going to be helpful. I'm sure, like I've ran into this pretty much my entire career up to this point, where I get databases where there's columns that aren't pertinent to any particular one provider. So I'm gonna show you a demonstration here on how ChatGPT can help you.
And that's a common one, right? Like we get a billing history from our data analytics tool, and what that billing history is doing is it's spitting out a report that's going to contain, I've seen in instances where there's not only the information that would be on the 1500 form in the submission of that claim, but a ton of other fields that just aren't really needed at that moment. And so where everybody is concerned about the use of AI, for example, on the provider side, for example, I've seen videos of providers who have created medical necessity letters using ChatGPT, where the provider says to ChatGPT, write me a letter of medical necessity justifying the use of XYZ, and ChatGPT creates a letter that is based in fact and referenced and whatever. So here's an example where ChatGPT is going to be able to do some things that help us on the payer side. So if you could just walk people through, what did you ask ChatGPT to do in the message, and what is ChatGPT now doing?
Yeah, something like very simple. So I literally just ask it, please write me an Excel macro that deletes all columns that only contain data in the top row. And within less than a second, you could see that it writes all of this. And if you're not a coder, this is like Swahili for you, but it's very, very simple to use. And they even give you, ChatGPT even gives you instructions on how to implement the macro that it just wrote for you. So it doesn't let you go into it blind. So first we'll copy the macro. Go into our data. So first it tells you Alt F11, and then we're going to open up a new, go to Insert Module, Insert New Module. I'm going to paste the macro that it just wrote for us. You could close this out now. And then Alt F8. And you can see here that it already wrote the macro for us. So delete columns with only the top row data, hit run. And then all blank columns with only a header have now been deleted. And you can see here all the way to the right. Now everything that we're looking at has data in it.
Now, for people that are watching this live, what I will tell everybody is that we're recording this event, and this will be as part of our newsletter. It'll be out there for people to go back and review after the fact on either our YouTube channel or through our website or something like that. So you don't feel like, if you feel like you're missing something on Dan's walkthrough, you're going to be able to get this. And we'll probably do a little bit of a write-up that we'll be able to include in the newsletter that talks about this. But so explain to me, Dan, because, right, so if you're not conversant in Excel, if you know some basic things in Excel, but you're really not good at some things in Excel, you essentially had a problem that you needed to address, and you used plain language in the ChatGPT request, and it took that plain language and then did exactly what you needed it to do, and then gave you the instructions. So it took a lot of the guesswork. And I know for me, a lot of my frustrations in Excel happen to be when I get those terrible dialog boxes about an error in my formula, or the exclamation point that no one seems to ever understand what that means unless you're inordinately conversant in Excel. I would say that while this may not have been a very difficult thing to do, if you're not really a strong user and you don't know how to follow the steps inherently that are given, this is a great way of being able to use ChatGPT for good versus evil in the world of Excel and fraud, waste, abuse.
Yeah, and it's very simple to use. And like you said, you could use very simplistic language without you having a strong background, just telling it literally what you need. Like, I need these columns to be blank that only have data in the top row. That's not anything that's scientific, or you don't have to be a master in Excel. You literally just tell it exactly what you need. And if you ever come up with an error, you can even prompt it afterwards, and it starts a conversation essentially with ChatGPT. So let's just say you do come across an error, and the macro that they gave you didn't do what you needed it to. You could literally tell ChatGPT and say, like, the output was blank after I input the macro, and they will actually troubleshoot what may have went wrong and give you examples on how to check your data and see, like, all right, maybe this is the reason why the macro didn't work for your specific scenario. So it's extremely helpful. It's extremely easy to use. It's a tool that I think everyone should be utilizing for sure.
And an important piece of this is that you're not giving ChatGPT access to any PHI or PII, right?
No,
you're
absolutely
going
not.
online, you're giving it in simple words, layman's terms, what your problem is and what you need to be done, and it's simply just answering what that problem or that question is, and then you have to go back and actually do that. So there is no integration, so to speak, between ChatGPT and Excel. You have to do it. It's kind of in a two-step approach. So without going into any other detail on this, because I think people generally get it, what are some of the other things that you're seeing where ChatGPT and that these features that ChatGPT can do from that AI perspective? What else are you using ChatGPT for?
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT has a lot of different capabilities. A lot of times it may not give you detail when you're asking it, like, oh, give me the most up-to-date fraud schemes when it comes to DME products. They'll give you, I think, generic information. They won't give you specific examples. There's different types of AI. Like, I know Google has their own. I think they just changed the name of it. It went from, I think it used to be called Bard. I think it might be Gemini now. Sometimes they'll actually give you references, and you can literally just create a conversation and try and get as much in-depth info as possible. It's just another tool for all of our investigative tool belts that I think everyone should definitely be utilizing. But Eric, I think it's a good point that you make, that there shouldn't be any worry as far as any type of information that shouldn't be shared. It's only going to give you what you give it. So basic layman's term, just what you want the Excel file to do, and you don't have to worry about any type of HIPAA violations or anything like that.
Yeah, data can be overwhelming, and so it's all about being able to parse this data in a way that makes it valuable and usable for the Dan Nicolinos of the world, right? Investigators, if you just got a data dump of a particular CPT code or a particular provider or whatever, you need to be able to understand, like, what is the value of that data? Is there something there, or are we barking up a tree that leads to nothing? And I think ChatGPT is going to be able to help, particularly for people who may not be overly knowledgeable of using Excel or Access or that. And I know we're going to turn to the use of Access. As time has gone on, people have, I think, gotten away from using Access as much as it might have been used in years past. When I was an OIG agent and I first started at the OIG, we had a data tool that was known as Argus, ARGUS. I don't know if it stood for something, if it was an acronym, and we would get this data. We would get billing data, we would import it into Argus, and it was really an Access overlay, and it allowed you to run maybe 8 or a dozen queries, and that was really it. It was very limited in its ability. For people that have been around for a while and know that in the early days of Excel had some really strong limitations on the number of lines. It only had, at one point, it was a $65,000 line maximum, and that's obviously increased as time gone on and computing power has gone on. But when you start to integrate our AI with something like ChatGPT into helping create formulas and write scripts and do all of these things, you're really going to be able to harness the power of your data in a way that will allow you to not spend your time spinning your wheels looking for what could be a needle in a haystack. The example that you just gave, Dan, on identifying the percentages, for example, that's an important piece of the puzzle, because if your allegation comes in and it's regarding a particular code that's only 1% or 2% of a particular provider's billings, are you really going to spend a lot of time on that versus an allegation where 80% of the provider's billings are a particular code where you're going to want to spend some time? So, that's a great example. And the use of ChatGPT to get rid of all the, we'll call it the data noise, all those empty fields and those empty columns. I've seen instances where people use ChatGPT to populate empty fields within a column. For example, you'll see instances where the paid amount is 0, but it's blank. And for those of you that use Excel a lot, you know that a blank column is kind of a reset for Excel. It's also a little bit like a trailing or a leading 0 in a string of numbers in a column. Excel will oftentimes, it doesn't appear, but it's treated as a placeholder space. And you need to account for that when you're doing data analytics. A good data analyst will always account for trailing and leading zeros, empty fields, and the like. From an investigative perspective, you're going to want to account for those as well, even when you're doing just your quick and dirty, reviews. So this is one of those things where I think ChatGPT is going to be a really big time saver for people. You could then go and copy and paste those into a OneNote or a Word document, and then you've got your macros saved for future, because if you're using it in one instance, you're likely going to be using it in future instances. So, as we start to wrap up on this, because we could talk about this kind of stuff for hours. I know that you're doing a lot of this in Excel for our SIU team. You're really helping do that. So let's talk about how you're using Access as an additional data analytic tool.
Yeah, I think Access, now let me preface this by saying I'd be hard pressed to say that I'd teach anyone Microsoft Access in a half hour, let alone if I had a week. But I do think it's a very strong tool to use. And if you have the opportunity, I strongly recommend playing around in it. There's a lot of things that, yes, you could do in Excel that you could do in Access that might be a little bit quicker. But there comes a point where when you're trying to do some more advanced data manipulation, Access reigns supreme over Excel. So I'm just going to show you one example of like how I use Access just about all the time. So that same claims database that we just cleaned up and got rid of all of the blank columns. This is what was uploaded into Access. So for this particular provider, we're going to try and identify dates of service in which they billed for both a preventative wellness visit and for an E&M for the same member on the same dates of service. And we want to identify those specific instances. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a query based off of the claims data. Just select the claims. And all I want to know is unique member, data service, and procedure code. So from here, you do a totals query because we want to group everything. I don't want to separate every line out. And then in the criteria, you could literally just put whatever code you want. So for this particular instance, we're going to do all of the E&M codes, the 99213, 99214, and 99215. We change this to make a table because we want to make this something that we could connect on another table. Say this is unique member, data service, E&Ms. We'll run this. So now this gives us a unique list, member, data service, and the procedure code that was built on that day, and it's only those E&Ms. Now I want to make a different table of the preventative wellness visits. You could actually even do between 392 and 6. I'm going to make this preventative. And you can see here all of the tables that you create show up in this left pane here. So we could close out this query, create a new query. So now we have the E&Ms and the preventative wellness visits. And now what I'm telling it to do is I want you to give me all of the member E&M dates of service, because that's what I'm dropping down on here. But I only want the ones where they match with the preventative wellness and matching only on the ID and the data service. And we'll run this. And you can see here that there's 83 instances in which at least one of those preventative wellness codes were billed and an E&M was billed on the same data service. So like this is something that I find extremely easy in Access that it'd be very difficult to do in Excel without you going through line by line and trying to identify and highlight instances of where these scenarios are, where it takes me less than a minute to look at that data and pull out those specific dates of service. And if this is what our focus is going to be, it's like we have our universe of claims right there in front of us.
And Dan, with something like this, can you set this up as a template to keep in Access going forward and then just bring your data in for the future so that you don't have to continue to recreate the wheel on this?
Yeah, you could save queries. You can make all types of forms to make life easy. So as soon as you dump the data into this, all you'd have to do is click the query and it'll run what I just did essentially for you without you having to do it multiple times. So this is another instance where I'm sure you could go to ChatGPT and ask it different types of Excel Access queries to create. Yeah, it's very easy once you get the hang of it. I think the analogy that I usually use is when you're using Access, you have to think a little bit differently. You notice how I had to set up 2 different tables before I got the information that I wanted. So Access, you have to kind of know the answer or where you want to get to and kind of work yourself backwards to get to that point. But again, I think it's a very strong tool that everyone should, if they have the opportunity to use, because it's gonna help you in the long run. I guarantee it.
Right, and I think that's an important point in Access, that the mindset of Access is a little bit like, what do I want the end result to be? and then getting to that end result or the steps. Where in Excel, it's what do I want these things to do, or how do I want them to interface? But look, I think the important piece is that, yeah, ChatGPT is going to be able to help you with creating that as well. But the other piece of this is that with Access, you can set these queries up in advance as a template. I know that you've done this for our SIU team. I've spoken to a number of the people on the team, and they have found that some of these templates that you've created are really unbelievably good, because they allow people to just bring that data in, and it sort of sets you up for some standard queries, right? So in most spaces, I think in a lot of the SIU spaces, the analytics will provide a lot of reporting, but some of that isn't as custom as you need it to be. There's only a finite number of reports that an analytics tool is going to be able to produce, because at the end of the day, every case is unique, and you're going to want to identify some of those unique things. I could see, for example, with this template here that you've got, I could see an instance where you're trying to match up common beneficiaries amongst providers, for example. And I know, as you know, we have a lot of our work happens to be contained in one particular metropolitan area, where the same provider may be billing 8 or 10 different plans. We're the SIU for many of those plans. And so you're able to identify an instance where maybe 2 providers on the same day are billing for the same beneficiary for different things. Is the patient really going to those 2 providers for those different things? Is there potentially a double billing scenario that goes on that we're not really seeing? And these kind of templates help to bring that to light. So, one of the things that I know that you guys are doing on the SIU team is, if you're finding a provider that's got an issue with one plan, you're looking across that data and sort of taking this aggregated look. So we're sort of working in almost on a smaller scale, like an HFPP, like the Healthcare Fraud Prevention Partnership or something like that, where we're taking the data from our different plans and looking at it across disparate plans to understand where there may be those issues. So it's really a great piece of the puzzle. The big take home, which gets back to the premise of why we're here today, is your leads are weak, and how do you make your leads stronger, and how do you inherently get your data to where it needs to be? What you're really doing, and I really do applaud you, is you've really learned how to master working smarter, not harder, because nailing your foot down and running around in a circle for 8 hours and then saying, man, I can't believe how far I went. You didn't go anywhere. And that's an important piece, is being able to get to that. So, we're coming to the end, and we want to give people a chance to go back and have some uninterrupted lunch if that's what they're doing. But in the world of analytics, in the world of data manipulation, you obviously are good at both Access and Excel. Which is your preferred database, and why?
Well, me personally, I prefer Access up to this point. I started with Excel, and to be completely honest with you, when I started with the AG's office, Excel was the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything about Access. I had never touched it before. Our data expert drilled it into my head to use Access, and it stuck with me. And I can't thank her enough for that. And in all honesty, I use it for everything. Even when my time with United Healthcare, where everyone was still using Excel, I would always try and use Access, and I would teach people any chance I could get. But I think it's a stronger tool. Like I said, it's going to take you changing the way you think about how you want to get your end result. But it's definitely a strong tool for every investigator.
Yeah, there's definitely, Access. I am not as conversant with Access as I am Excel. There is definitely a learning curve to Access, but I think, what you just demonstrated on ChatGPT and the like can really help to get you from point A to point B with any of these tools. So
yeah, it's going to accelerate it tenfold at least.
Yeah. Look, Dan, this was great. I really appreciate getting this walkthrough. Again, for people that are watching this live, we're recording this. You will be able to go back, review this later on. We will put links to this in the newsletter so you can go and see where things are. Again, if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, any suggestions for our OIG roundtable, for our future LinkedIn Live broadcasts, please let us know. You can send us an email at hello@advize, A-D-V-I-Z-E, health.com. We appreciate you signing up for our newsletter. If you're not getting up the newsletter, you can get us on hello@advizehealth.com. Feel free to connect up with us on LinkedIn, both Advize as a company. I'm prolific on LinkedIn. Our OIG roundtables are up on our website. They're up on YouTube and Spotify. You can get them. So tune in to our LinkedIn Lives in coming months. We've got a lot of really exciting things planned. Dan, as always, great to connect up with you. Great to see you. And again, we thank everybody for the time they're spending. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again for supporting Advize Health and our LinkedIn Lives. We'll see you at the next one.
Appreciate it. Thank you.